As I've discussed about my first adventures into Innsbruck and subsequently having wonderful summers that with the law students and the law faculty, I was very blessed in that time of international travel and continue to do so. Although we've had that 2-year break now with COVID restrictions, and we are planning this summer 2022 to return to Innsbruck. The China program, of course, is now in a hiatus, and there's a sadness in my heart about that, given all that's happening in our world and our own, what we're able to do to extend, how many international programs we can extend with the student body, but also still very cautious about international travel and safety. And that would be obvious from all that people have read in the paper around our business and international relations. Although our legal community continues to do business and law with China, which will continue, and that was the foundation of it, was to help the law students who might go into international business, especially, to understand what was required in trademarks, in torts, in patent law. But I do remember its early beginnings. And Dean Charles Cantu, I have great regard for. We've had many wonderful time together, memorable experiences. I knew him from '97 when he was a professor, well loved by the law students. We actually created a fund in his honor that continues today. The class of '97 initiated a Charles Cantu Fund for the Future. And that fund has helped us to do service projects all these years from the class that regarded him and wanted to honor him, and in turn gave the money to law ministry to oversee our service projects. So I had many an occasion of interacting with Professor Cantu, and I was happy when he had appointment as Dean of St. Mary's Law School. And in that regard, that gave him the opportunity to follow his dream. He had a dream from the time he was a little boy to go to China. And when he first went there on a tour, I think, he was a world traveler himself, he realized that all the buildings, everything in China was very modernized. It was not the image that he probably had from his childhood books, although the cultural dimension is certainly there. The ancient buildings, the history is amazing. When we think in Texas of our Alamo, you go to China and you realize the ancient buildings, the history, the Great Wall, so much that I came to regard and appreciate this ancient culture. It was very respectful, very hospitable to us. So Dean Cantu got to realize his dream with the first group that went to Beijing, China. We were partnered with Beijing University, a university that we were fortunate that Professor Hu was director of the library, also had many colleagues because he had gone to law school in China. And so the partnership between Professor Hu, Dean Cantu, and also Professor Vince Johnson, later interim Dean Johnson, he was also internationally traveled and had done Fulbright scholars around the world. So his courses in torts were very well regarded, and he has since written, co-authored numerous publications in China on tort law and patent law, as Professor Hu has done. And so I remember they really asked me if I could go, and I was happy to do that, not sure what I was going to get into. We were in the Kristen Ruman, okay. I still communicate with her, and she had done her master's work in Beijing, and so she knew Chinese. So I attached myself to her. And it was wonderful just to get to know her and to share in the experiences and just to get comfortable traveling around in an area you weren't all that sure of, to learn the subways, to go into subways and be like standing really very close to a lot of people. However, it was so interesting. They still were very, nobody ever pushed or shoved. Well, they did kind of, I guess. But it's like I never felt threatened in any way, even though there's, so many people there. But I really had a great time, and I think little by little we were in the dorms. It was kind of like a Motel 6. I did not realize that what I was on was not a bed, but just the bottom of just the bottom, like the very hard surface of what would be a mattress bottom, and but we started to create some gatherings. So Professor Hu would take us to restaurants. Had Beijing duck, this famous duck that is barbecued duck, and very good, by the way. And so little by little, I guess I got to know where it would be comfortable for our students to go. They have a lot of nice coffee shops, and it's a university area. So actually, it was very easy to navigate after you just knew which gate to get out. It was also huge. It was a huge university. There was 4 gates, and you just had to know what direction you were going in. And by the next year, I was able to, as I've gotten to know people, it was a lot of older people that also were choosing to go to China because it would help their careers, or they already had business interests. Somebody had a ranch, and he was going to also explore what would be similar to our A&M over there, to look at cow production because the meat business was growing in China. And yes, I'm from Philadelphia, remember, not Texas. And I'll never forget when he came back from his visit to the campus, to the group he was visiting with, about bringing some of his cows, well, to do business, ranching business with these people. And so he said, I was talking to him, and I said, but how are you going to get the cows over there? Well, there isn't, the cows don't go. A specimen from them goes. And then they're used to enhance the meat production. So anyway, yeah, I still laugh about that one too. But that's a good example of the people that went to China, the law students that went to China, just had that interest from a business angle or cultural angle. And many of them I continue friendships with today. I think there was something about surviving together because we were dependent on each other. It wasn't a city like Innsbruck where you could just go off and feel like, oh, down the street was, this nice area to walk in. Because the campus was so huge, let alone the city, let alone the subway system, you really did, I think we had to rely on each other. And in that case, I think it was the best example of a community that came together. Yes, after 6 weeks, I'm sure they had issues. Some people might have had issues with each other. But for the most part, I'd say we really regarded and got to know each other. And so little by little, I would find out where these spots were. I found where a Mexican restaurant was. I knew where I knew where would be good places and even cultural places to go to. So when the students subsequently came the next 9 years, I would do little tours. And again, I got to know the students that way. So we had a lot of good times together. And in the course of getting to know some of the older students, they in turn had such a good experience, very regardful of the professors, and the professors that joined us from the Beijing University, that they wanted to have that opportunity for other students to go. So that's when I started some of the scholarships to China, to the Beijing program. And I was very happy that we could extend some financial assistance for students. It was less expensive in some ways. It was living there, but it was more expensive to fly, of course. And then over time, I saw where the faculty stayed, not the Motel 6 I was at. And once I went to visit for a meeting and saw where they were staying, which was a couple blocks away, I felt bad that I abandoned the students, at least from the living situation, but I never went back. And they, but we still got together regularly at the little coffee shop in the dorm. And then, so I would start so one time we were out walking, exploring the city, and we found by accident a rooftop Italian restaurant. And it was kind of like our Olive Garden, but while we had done a lot of the culture of food, there was something about familiar food that was welcomed, to have pasta and a salad. And wine is very expensive in China because it's imported. So to find a very reasonable place that had good food and a rooftop restaurant in the embassy area, those of us who were there that day just really enjoyed it. So we brought some other people back, and that became my annual event. Now people would have to, it was kind of like the Great Amazing Race, because traffic in Beijing, especially at rush hour, it can take a long time. The subways are the best avenue for travel, but you had to figure out how to get to this rooftop restaurant in the embassy area. So people would come in having had their stories. I remember one of the Tommy Lou arriving in a rickshaw. So people came, they'd come up the stairs, and then they'd find this wonderful restaurant, and they'd sit down and have a glass of wine, and they'd relax. But all of them had some story about what it took to get there. But I never changed it. Huh?
What years was this? Was this before Google Maps?
Yeah, it was before we had, I'd say I saw the development of phones. You know, when we first went, phones, I realize how old I am. Yeah, I would say that it was before even the beginning of phone service, international phone service, that wouldn't be costly. We would, later on, we would get a phone that they would rent. But no, I think the early days we did, well, even the later days, I still don't know how to use it. But the early days, I don't think we had that. You would have to maybe look it up on the internet, but not necessarily on your phone. But anyway, it became this wonderful tradition, and people would look forward to it. So I was glad to do that. I was fortunate to also, the 10th year, be there for the 10th anniversary of the program. And we joined with other universities in Beijing that also hosted summer programs or year-round programs for American students. So there was a conference. The students that were attending that year also got to sit at the table to share their experience of the studies. And I thought it was wonderful. One of the students that was sharing his experience had never flown before. China was his first flight ever. So we joked that any 2-hour flight was going to seem easy after his 13-hour flight. But we were sitting around the table, and they had put, they used to call me the professor of spirituality, because they were trying to, it was hard to explain in a culture that doesn't have our religious traditions, what a campus minister was and what a campus minister in a law school was. So they kind of named me the professor of spirituality. And so I had professor on my nameplate, and then they would refer to me as professor. And I leaned over to Professor Johnson, Dean Johnson then, and I said, does this mean I'm going to get a raise? No, professor. But I explained our program around the table. I was really happy to explain not only the program, but all our generous benefactors that helped us to do that. And also a real tribute to Dean Cantu for his foresight into the program. I think we all still remember it with great fondness. A lot of laughs that we had and a real enrichment, I think, in their legal careers. When I first came here in 1994, the room I'm in right now where we're taping was a closet. And now luckily it was a large closet, but there hadn't been a campus minister before. So that had an office. I think Father Elias would be upstairs, he'd visit with the faculty, and I think he had a faculty space upstairs that he would sit at. But in terms of doing larger gatherings of students, I certainly needed a bigger office. So they set me up in what was then the former law library. So when I used to come to campus, because I worked right next door at the Center for Life Directions, and when the campus ministry offices moved there, then Sister Teresa Trimboli was a law librarian. So I would come over to visit her periodically, and I'd go up the stairs because the circulation desk was on the second floor of this building, Rabba building, and it was the law library. It's now our faculty building, retained the name for Dean Rabba, and it's now our faculty building. But let me situate that in a little of the history of the law school. The law school was founded by the San Antonio Bar Association and was downtown. If you're ever on a Riverwalk tour or on the boat tour, you'll go by and they'll describe the La Mansione Hotel was the original site of the law school. And that San Antonio Bar, founded in 1927 as a part-time school that met at night at the courthouse. Then San Antonio offered to make it part of the university with a stronger curriculum and a full-time faculty in 1934. So in 1934, the law school acquired its name. It was still down at the river, but it acquired its name of St. Mary's and the Catholic and Marianist Mission, and excellence in preparation. It was known, and still is known, as the Lawyers' Law School. Especially, I think we're given a lot of recognition with our clinical program and all these tremendous accomplishments of our Board of Advocates in moot court competitions nationally and internationally. So we are really known as the Lawyers' Law School. And the first class that came met at night, and there were 31 men and women, and the day division opened in 1940, becoming a fixture in 1948, and it received accreditation by the American Bar Association. We're up for accreditation again in 2022. But the big change came in 1967 when the school moved by then the 400 students to the St. Mary's main campus. So we have the three buildings, the Rabba on campus here, the Rabba building with the law faculty and our Board of Advocates and our Center for Law Success. And adjacent is our law administration building and the law classroom building. And that was the three in the original move here. And then in the Sarita Kennedy East Foundation in 1982, the grant funded the Sarita Kennedy East library. So that law library was dedicated. And the new law center, though, was dedicated at a Red Mass, which I talked about earlier, in 1968, with a blessing from the Archbishop and a dinner speech from the then Governor John Connolly. And in 1968, the first law journal, which is also what we're known for, our outstanding publications of the Law Journal and the Scholar. And the Law Journal, the first Law Journal editors was Justice Joe Greenhill and Marty Byrne. And you might hear that name, Marty Byrne, because we have the now Byrne Center for Catholic Studies. So Marty Byrne graciously donated for the Catholic Center of Studies. So the Sarita Kennedy East Library was the newest addition at that time. And I think in my time then, in 2005, we began a capital campaign to update the courtroom that was in the law classroom building. So that was an important accomplishment to have the facilities for hosting these trial competitions, as well as then to offer advocacy training and other courses for students in a well-appointed courtroom. I also was here when, in 1994, 95, between 1990, the dedication of the Center for Legal and Social Justice. I was there at its blessing. I was able to assemble the ideas for the blessing with the then Dean Barbara Adave. It was very memorable because I had helped them go over when our retreat house was up for sale. I knew it was up for sale, and they were looking for a building that the clinics had existed in 1990 under the direction of Mary Ann Crosby, the class of 95. She had expanded the clinical programs, and also then through grants that came, there were centers located at different buildings in San Antonio, but the effort to bring the Center for Legal and Social Justice together to bring all the clinics into one building. So I had taken the then Barbara Adave over to view the building, and she thought it was going to be close enough to St. Mary's University because it's a couple blocks down the street, but also accessible for those clients coming on buses or so it wasn't as intimidating as coming to a law school, but it also had grounds and huge opportunity to grow the clinical programs, which did happen. And so I remember still we all processed over from here at St. Mary's University, down the street over to the clinics, over to the Center for Legal and Social Justice. And for so many years under the direction of Professor Ana Novoa, who's since retired, and now under the direction of Professor Karen Kelly. I can't say enough about the wonderful work at the Center for Legal and Social Justice. So many of their clients are homeless, do not have a voice. The outstanding efforts in immigration, day to day defending the rights of those who don't even know their rights. So while it's, in some ways, it would be more beneficial to have the center facilities and students to be able to attend, to be at a building on campus. I'm not sure what the future of that is, but at the moment that our other building still is where the Center for Legal and Social Justice is housed. I think that right now there's a campaign to naming rights to enhance some of the facilities here at the law school. Several years ago, under the direction of Dean Steve Shepard, he had, I think it was a wonderful idea to take part of the Kennedy Library, and it's now called the Commons, similar to the bottom floor of the St. Mary's undergrad library. It's a huge gathering room. Students can study individually or study as a group. It has whiteboards. They can outline cases, some opportunities just to have snacks. So it's an all-purpose room, well needed for, especially for studies, and gets a whole lot of use as we're heading into exams right now. Well, what I love about this 30-year history is all the history I have with so many law students, now law alumni. I'm kind of like that mother that really enjoys seeing the accomplishments of, wouldn't say her children, but her prodigy, so to speak. And I think it's just a gift to know people from their first day of law school all the way through as they develop their legal careers and then go into public service. So recently, as I discussed about in Red Mass, now Judge Rosie Speedland Gonzalez, she helped me from her first days of law school and has continued to do anything I need. If I call Rosie, she loves Red Mass, and she'll help connect. She extends invitations so people would know about Red Mass. And I just continue to, if I'm at events where she's a speaker, I've enjoyed those continued connections. And at the last Red Mass, Rosie gave me my pair of red running shoes so that I can keep going to plan Red Mass, but to keep going in life. She would describe the way I would walk was always my head forward, and I'm always running to a destination because try to keep up with everything I do. So I feel like the shoes will help. But it also reminds me of I've been at a number of people's swearing in as they've assumed public office. And I was able to be at her swearing in. She made arrangements to pick up several of her friends that we went down for New Year's Eve swearing in ceremony a couple of years ago now. And I was thinking I was going to, I thought law office, and I imaged a law building and New Year's Eve. Well, it was, I didn't realize, especially in the Southtown area, there's a lot of law offices that are in houses. So it really, I mean, it's kind of I don't know if other cities have that, but it's kind of a tribute to having legal offices in neighborhoods. And so, anyway, but because it was New Year's Eve, of course, there was some frivolities before the swearing-in ceremony as people were coming to congratulate her. But I knew I had to pray, so I couldn't partake too much. And then all of a sudden, after the fireworks went off, then we started the ceremony. As the revelers were coming by, streaming in from the tower, there I was on the street giving my prayer. I think that was one of my more challenging. But I'm always glad to do that for people in the legal community. And I wish that our law students could attend some of them, because it's so moving for me to see how they. There's always a minister, at least in my experience, there's been a minister as part of the ceremony, and just their pledge to public office. So if I can keep running or walking, at least I have better shoes to do that now. I found that a really interesting, engaging, and thoughtful question. I think where it leads me is probably to talk about the fact that I have been here 30 years. I suspect one of the challenges is continue to adapt and change under each new administration. I've been very fortunate that each dean I've worked for, Dean Barbara Aldave, Dean Bill Pyatt, interim Dean Cantu, as I discussed, interim Dean Vince Johnson, Dean Steve Shepard, and the current Dean Patricia Roberts, I've all been very supportive of law ministry. I don't get involved in insider politics, and that's natural to a law school. There's decisions to be made, changes that happen under each administration, challenges in all kinds of ways to keep a law school such as ours with the reputation we have in academic excellence, and to continue the development so that we can grow and also provide the best facilities, the best faculty, as we have been known for. So I see that they have many more challenges than I do. But my mission is always to support the mission of the school, that we provide training for lawyers to be ethical, lawyers with integrity, and the St. Mary's mission of giving back, giving back to the community wherever they are in their work-related lives, and to have the attitude of leadership for service. I've been fortunate that we have a large tribute wall to all the students that we've provided recognition for that in their 3 years. And that is a challenge to have students only for 3 years. Mostly when they come in their first year, they're a captive audience, but they're also in a fearful state, not knowing what going to law school actually means, and then the first exam. I always joke that over the summer, they get experience, they come back and they're able to wax out eloquently about legal cases, to start the legal writing and to be published, the accomplishments in public service. I just got back from talking to students about ID recovery. They were just thrilled that they could, I think, put together their legal career with their own passion for service. So to help the homeless or those who have lost their IDs, who can't get any services until they're reinstated with the paperwork so they can get their IDs. That just brings a lot of joy to my heart, that says that's the mission, is having students in whatever profession, whatever aspect of the law they go into. They can be in big firms, small firms, solo practitioners, public service, but to have that attitude of service. So I think it's a challenge, but in a good way, for me to always keep partnering with people, knowing what's going on in the community. We've really, as I discussed before, Greg Zlotnick has really enhanced our pro bono program. There's more service projects, pro bono opportunities than I can keep up with. But I think that's a challenge. How do I keep focused on the mission? And so far, that's really worked, even with adapting to new administrations. I personally, one of the challenges is also technology, because you have to remember, I started in the purple ditto time, went into typewriters, learned the computer on the fly, and every time they change the system, I have to find the new. It's like I was describing, it's like moving the grocery store shelves, that I have to now find where the new buttons are. So I think, but again, what a benefit when I see all the papers I have and are now getting rid of, because so much, even of this history, is online now. So I think that technology, I'd say that's a challenge for me. Adapting to change, keeping current, not missing opportunities to meet law students. I think the challenge was clearly during COVID times. All of a sudden, I took for granted that I just meet students. And in my memory, leading the prayer out by the statue of St. Joseph, and imaging the students that would have been walking across campus, but were all at home. As I led the graduation prayer at the statue of St. Joseph, it was very poignant for me to say all of a sudden, the students I took for granted aren't there anymore. I think that was an incredible challenge, and I think we'll still see the impact for the students that went to school remotely. This is in the 3 years here, this is their first in-person exam for some of them. And the other day, I realized there was a real need, as Amanda Rivas was leading a blessing for a group, an individual blessing for the students that she was having sessions with to talk to them about externships in the Valley. And she led individual blessings for them, and they all teared up every time she prayed. And part of it was the camaraderie of being from the Valley and knowing circumstances of even first generations going to law school. But it made me realize there was a need there, and I hadn't thought of it. But that's okay, because I saw the opportunity. So I just was discussing how can we provide something in the courtyard, perhaps for an individual blessing. I used to do a group blessing at a gathering, but that's changed. And again, I have to keep adapting. Part of our Marianist charism our characteristics of education and legal education is adaptation and change. So I think just always being aware that I'm here for the students, and I try to also support the faculty and staff. Sometimes I guess a challenge is how much, I don't have a regular schedule. So there's a lot of events at night. I have a wonderful opportunity to, this Sunday I'm praying at the Judge Andy Morales Foundation that provides scholarships. And I've been included in their fundraiser for many years. And so making sure that I keep an open door for the law students, so I'm not so busy with activities that I'm not able to stop for a student that comes to the door. I think at the same time, extending my ministry into the community has been incredibly important. Networking with legal organizations in San Antonio. So I think the challenge sometimes of balancing my schedule, nobody ever really tells me what to do. Sometimes I do get emails requesting things, and so I have to adapt or respond to things that weren't on my schedule. But I guess fortunately I kind of have that. I like going to events. I think the challenge as you get older, though, is just keeping organized. So the more events I do, I don't always finish filing, which is why we're sitting at the part of my office that looks like it's very neat. But if we turn the camera, you'll see the pile of, I still believe in paper files, which I'm trying to wean away from. And so I think that's a challenge. Yes, to understand, not to take for granted that the law students, just because they look like they know what they're doing, aren't also dealing with many personal experiences. I think, during COVID time, one of the most poignant stories, I guess, was Gilbert Vasquez. We've documented his story. When his father and his whole family got COVID, and he himself is a quadriplegic, and his father ended up in the hospital. And he called me and he called a few faculty to ask for prayers. And I really felt like that was significant to say, yes, I am going to pray for the healthcare workers, for his dad's recovery, for the family dealing with so much. We were able to offer just some financial support so they could transition. His dad came with him to every class, even at graduation, walked across the stage with him. So I was thrilled when the dad called and had gotten out of recuperation time and called to thank me for the prayers. So you can't say that it's not just doing things, but I think as a Marianist sister, as a chaplain, it's realizing the importance of prayer and being with people in their immediate need. And just never getting too busy that you can't respond to who's ever in front of you. So I think that's a challenge. I think one of the benefits of being a Marianist sister, and as you know, the Marianist family is Marianist priests, brothers, sisters, and lay people, all committed to Mary's mission of bringing the values of Jesus and Jesus' message to those we serve and to our world. And I'm happy that I'm in a religious order that is male and female. I think that's been a real compliment all my religious life. I've been on multiple committees with Marianists in many formats. So I think the complementary of men and women has been a real gift for me of our Marianist family. I think also because it's St. Mary's University, we look to Mary as a woman of faith, and we can take such guidance from her. And I suspect that led me when our St. Mary's University developed their Women's History Month, and I was joining on in the early days. I can't say enough about wonderful work that several varying committees have done over the years, and the leaders that have Angelique Wilson right now and Diane Dusterhoff and so many of the women that led our efforts in Women's History Month. And as a result, that brought me to to really think about how do I translate that into working with the women at the law school. We have a very organized, excellent women's law student association. They have taken the lead in so many efforts, and one of them is the auction they do. They've raised $10,000–$15,000 for many justice organizations through their auction that they have. And as a result of working with them and their outstanding leadership and knowing the women judges on the Fourth Court of Appeals, as I discussed earlier, I wanted to honor first Chief Justice Alma Lopez, then retired Chief Justice Catherine Stone, and then currently retired Chief Justice Sandy Bryan Marion. So I was able to create, again, awards in their names and have the law students nominate women in the law. And I was just really appreciated the fact that many of our male colleagues, male law students, would nominate women with very heartfelt commendations for their work. And also that often a group of women that get nominated, they all get recognized as a woman in law leader, and all of them get a certificate with that recognition, and then a few are chosen to be named after the Chief Justices for their exemplary work. But they've all had, when they talk, they all have such regard for each other. And there isn't that, what might be like, why did she get it? It's been a lot of testimonies that the people really regard the work of each other. And often many of them get recognized in other capacities as well. So you can see that they've been leaders in the school. I'm not sure, I've asked that, I guess, of law students. I think there's a nice mix on campus. I think because there's so many women in the law that led the way for our law students. That might not have been true when our law school was predominantly men, and there was only a few women at the start. I'm sure there were challenges that the older lawyers and judges could talk about that they faced. I think there is a community sense, again, as part of our mission at St. Mary's, and I think there really is a good balance of men and women working together in many programs that we have, helping each other, many legal organizations. So I'm really regardful of that on campus. Not sure in the job market, I guess I can't really speak to that, but I think we've had so many women trailblaze in San Antonio, and they've led the way for our law students, our law student women. We just finished a diversity committee. So much happened after all our racial unrest, along with COVID when we were facing that. And we've always been facing it. I think, again, it just came into the acknowledgement again that we had more to do, and especially more to do in our educational atmosphere. And so we developed what now we call the affinity groups. And then last year they had a welcome. The Women's Bar again led the way, but they invited the Hispanic law students, the Black law students, and the LGBT legal organization everybody was welcomed at the table. I think that was the theme in a sense, and Dean Patricia Roberts led the way. When she first came, she developed the diversity committee, and so many of us, again, we didn't have students on campus, but through Zoom and then through inviting some of the student representatives from those groups to be in conversation to talk about what are the racial issues on campus. And especially, I think, some classes, I think what I learned, I guess, some classes, have historical issues in them. They're discussing racial issues, and how faculty members help or not to have conversations that are respectful, because there easily can be a lot of hot tempers. It's an issue that is, part of our society. It was even more so, I think, as we faced elections, and how to help the students, especially when they're hot button topics in the classroom. And so we might have a congenial atmosphere in our social life, but it has to carry into that we don't all see, and that's a good thing. We don't all come from the same backgrounds, and we have opinions, and the students are preparing to be advocates, and they face adversarial issues and adversaries. So training, I think, how to be professional in settings, to disagree, of course, and to have your opinions, but also to do that in a way that's respectful. I think that's a real challenge for students. But I think we've worked more at seeing each person. Each person has a story, and to see that person, not just to what we think about them, but as we get to know people that come from different backgrounds and walks of life. I think a marvelous new program is this first generation law student. I never would have thought of it. Remember, I'm from Philadelphia. I'm not sure that I didn't really know the Hispanic community. I'm glad to be welcomed into it, but I wouldn't have known them. I wouldn't have known some of the issues that the Hispanic community faced. I think over time I've certainly come to, and visiting in the Valley, and some of our students come from a background, some students, law students, will have generations of family members that were judges and lawyers. So they grew up talking about it at the dinner table. And then other law students that come, they're coming from not even having seen a lawyer. And yet something compelled them. Maybe it was a government class, maybe it was debating in high school. I don't know how much TV played into it, but they come to law school without without having seen any models, I guess. And so the insecurities that arise. So it's been very important that these new programs to help first generation law students. And then the boot camp now that also helps them prepare in the early, before they start law school, to know how to brief a case, to know how to read what might be required. And I think that the students that come into that program in the summer also then in turn, I think, form a community, because now it's an acknowledgement that not everybody walking around knows exactly what is involved in going to law school. So I think our affinity groups have been very helpful. Yes, Asian Americans too, where we have a smaller population in their regard. And then we had a panel of lawyers who also talked about what it was like to be a first generation lawyer, or what are the issues currently, racial issues currently in the legal profession. And again, it's not, I don't always have to know the answers. I think it's about continuing myself to learn. I think that was an important time in responding. I'm happy now that St. Mary's has a diversity officer in an office, because I think that you talk about challenges, I think that is one we need to continue to grow into. People of different faiths or no faith background. Yes, and as our cultures, I think we'll probably have interesting things will happen as the people are preparing to welcome the Afghan community into San Antonio. A number of religious are helping them to relocate or to provide services, and our law students have done so with Catholic Charities. So I think our history in our nation challenges us, and I think that this generation will face those challenges, I hope, and improve our racial justice relationships. And I hope St. Mary's continues to have the kind of dialogues in helping us to understand each other. Teaching the law is teaching the law everywhere. I've been at meetings of other religiously affiliated law schools and who have a mission similar to ours. So I think teaching the law is the focus. That's the focus of going to law school. And I would hope that what makes us unique is, as I've discussed, some of the Marianist characteristics that translate into finding a place. I remember one law student saying when she went over to the Center for Legal and Social Justice that she found her people, because she had a particular sense of a mission to help others, not just to get, it's a good thing to get a good paying job, but she also had another, coming out of her family experience. Her parents had been immigrants. And so coming from that experience, I thought that was a great line. I found my people, and they find a passion for the kind of work they want to do. I think our faculty are very accessible. They care about the students. Some of the larger law schools, I'm not sure, because you also have to publish, as does our faculty. The other, even post-COVID, I had a laugh to myself. I had an event for our evening students, for our evening student program, and their faculty members, they invited them to come to a social, and it was at 7:30 at night after their last class at the end of the semester over at the pub, and they showed up. And I just thought, I guess having all of us been inside for a long time, it was probably a good opportunity to get out. But I was impressed that they regarded the students to come and attend. I think so many of the faculty have connections that they provide mentorship for our students, but they also provide connections for careers. I think our support staff are also very mindful that students are under stress and try to respond in appropriate ways to help relieve that or make the needed connections for them. I do think our religious mission is important to people of faith, to find reassurance, to have this opportunity to have a prayer or a blessing, to be able to talk about your faith openly. Some of our faculty, not everybody, but some of our faculty will lead a prayer, and I think the witness of faculty praying has been important. We have the class integrating Marianist values and ethics in the law. So I think I guess the community makes us again a place where they're intellectually challenged. It's not just everybody gets along, but that the community is an academic community, and it really provides a challenge to do your best. But the other day when one of the law students, his mother had just had a heart attack, and I guess he didn't have the funds to necessarily go home, but his classmates put together and sent him home to St. Louis. And I think acts like that, when I first came here, one of the students, her parents were ministers, and one of the parents was in the hospital, and I remember almost the first thing we did was students collected and I took the check over to them, or the cash over to them, and how grateful they were for that support. Students responded when one of our law students had her children from that, I guess it was a stepchildren, but from Haiti, or her children, and I'm not sure the total circumstances, but the students raised money to send her with another law student who is military background to Haiti, and they went and found her children, and eventually they we're able to bring them back to the United States. Yeah, post-Katrina, our law students responded with help as we have for other issues that have occurred. So I think there's responding to people in need or crises, caring. I think we're a law school with heart, and there might be other law schools out there, but I would say that our St. Mary's Law School has heart. And I also recall that one of the law students said to me when they were at some other meetings of law schools, they had bragging rights that they had a sister. And they had a sister that gave them peanut butter and jelly, but that they had a sister, and that made them feel like that was something unique. And it is. The Marianists have, in all our universities and in our law schools, well, the two, but the fact that there's a commitment to having a campus minister accessible to students, whether that's in support, in the challenges they face with their own family issues, or to cheer them on in their day-to-day work. So I am proud to be their sister in the law. As we're approaching the feast of Our Lady of Guadalupe, I was very fortunate that under Dean Barbara Ardave, who had such a heart for the Hispanic community especially, but bringing people together at the time. She was also working with anti-death penalty work out of her own legal experience, background, and a real dedication to helping our law students understand the implications of the death penalty. I would have, I think until I sat in on these lectures, I just wouldn't have thought about it very much, or it was the reinstatement of the death penalty, so I didn't know all the implications. And I remember the first conferences I went to where she had undertaken to provide this kind of dialogue, law journal articles written on it. So it was Sister Helen Prejean was our first speaker, who's still a trailblazer again in the anti-death penalty movement, restorative justice now, finding alternative ways that punishment is not the answer, but bringing people together to acknowledge the harm that was done, to seek reconciliation in whatever format that takes, and especially, in certain circumstances, maybe with juveniles especially, to look for other ways than to just throw people into jail, but to provide avenues for people to understand the impact of their crime, not just on the individual, that's certainly true, but on the community as well. And so she hosted Sister Helen Prejean at our first Our Lady of Guadalupe Mass. And of course that was well attended. Sister Helen has come several times to St. Mary's University and to San Antonio as we've worked with the Journey of Hope. It's the group that travels together. They are people that are lawyers that work with as a defense attorney. They've been the people that have exonerated those falsely accused on death row that have been maybe on there for 25 years and were exonerated. They're family members who lost a family member through murder. They're the exonerated who have been freed from jail. They travel together, pray together, and they give testimony that the death penalty is not the answer. And there's been so many exonerations that make it even more challenged to say, is this, yes, there's heinous crimes, and yes, there is life without parole, but certainly through education and understanding the impact of the death penalty on our community. But Sister Helen, of course, testifies to this, and that was our first Our Lady of Guadalupe. Certainly look into Our Lady of Guadalupe as our Mother of Justice and giving a voice to the voiceless. So subsequently, all these years, we've continued that practice of having Our Lady of Guadalupe gathering. It later became an opportunity to give a Santa Maria Justice Award to those in our community that work closely with the Center for Legal and Social Justice. And mariachis, the same mariachi group had come all these years. And so it was very hard when that was one of the events in the last 2 years that we couldn't have in person. We were just talking about how we might reinstate it, but still with the limits we have of how we can still gather safely. And a reminder, I guess, that, yes, we're still in it and we're still working to keep each other safe. But to bring back some type gathering. I don't think I wouldn't say there's another law school that probably has an Our Lady of Guadalupe event opportunity to celebrate the hard work of the center. They are the faculty that when you hear the students, I was just at a Thanksgiving party at the center, and the students that became fellows or work with the ID recovery at Haven for Hope, the impact that their experience has on them, and you can hear in their voices just the appreciation for our faculty at the Center for Legal and Social Justice, and their dialogues with each other that really help them feel like, as one of the students said, I can do something. And again, I think that it's not so much that other law schools don't have to do that, but the Our Lady of Guadalupe celebration, and then in turn I would get, instead of the priest giving the homily, I started having different members of the community to share who Our Lady of Guadalupe is for them and how she inspires or influences them. It's been a wonderful way to listen to the members in our own community give reflections. And we take for granted sometimes, we don't really know, until somebody has to put to words their experience, I think we take for granted that the priest is giving the homily, but in addition to have the voice of our lay people and those who are in the front lines of doing the work of justice and rededicating our centered legal and social justice to Our Lady of Guadalupe each year so she can continue to oversee their mission, and such an important one it is.